On this day in history, March 9th, 1862, as part of the American Civil War, the USS Monitor and the CSS Virginia, rebuilt from the engines and lower hull of the USS Merrimack, fight to a draw in the Battle of Hampton Roads, the first battle between two ironclad warships. Included in the following is an excerpt from the 1944 edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica going over the battles of the Merrimack and the Monitor. Monitor and Merrimack, Battle of. A naval engagement which was fought early in the American Civil War, notable as the first conflict between ironclad vessels. In the spring of 1861, the Federals set fire to several war vessels in the Gasport Navy Yard on the Elizabeth River, Virginia, and abandoned the place. In June, the Confederates set to work to raise one of these abandoned vessels, the frigate Merrimack, of 3,500 tons and 40 guns, and to rebuild it as an ironclad. The vessel, renamed the Virginia, though she is generally known in history by her original name, was first cut down to the waterline, and upon her hull was built a rectangular casemate, constructed of heavy timber, 24 inches in thickness. Covered with bar iron 4 inches thick, and rising from the water on each side at an angle of about 35 degrees, the iron plating extended 2 feet below the waterline, and beyond the casemate toward the bow, was a cast-iron pilot-house extending 3 feet above the deck. The reconstruction of the vessel was completed on March 5, 1862. She drew 22 feet of water, was equipped with poor engines, so that she could not make more than 5 knots, and was so unwieldy that she could not be turned in less than 30 minutes. She was armed with 10 guns, 2 rifled 7-inch, 2 rifled 6-inch, and 6 smooth-bore Dahlgren 9-inch. Her most powerful equipment, however, was her 18-inch cast-iron ram. In October 1861, Captain John Erickson, an engineer, and a Troy, New York firm, as builders began the construction of the ironclad Monitor for the Federals at Greenport, Long Island. For the idea of the low freeboard and the revolving turret, Erickson was indebted to Theodore R. Timby, born 1819, died 1909, who in 1843 had filed a caveat for revolving towers for offensive or defensive warfare, whether placed on land or water, with a view to enable this vessel to carry at good speed the thickest possible armor compatible with buoyancy. Erickson reduced the exposed surface to the least possible area. Accordingly, the vessel was built so low in the water that the waves glided easily over its deck, except at the middle, where was constructed the revolving turret for the guns. And though the vessel's iron armor had a thickness of 1 inch on the deck, 5 inches on the side, and 8 inches on the turret, its draft was only 10 feet 6 inches, or less than 1/2 that of the Merrimack. Its turret, 9 feet high and 20 feet in inside diameter, seems small for its length of 172 feet, and its breadth of 41 feet 6 inches. And this, with the lowness of its freeboard, caused the vessel to be called the Yankee cheese box on a raft. Forward of the turret was the iron pilot-house, square in shape, and rising about 4 feet above the deck. The Monitor's displacement was about 1,200 tons, and her armament was 2 11-inch Dahlgren guns. Her crew numbered 58, while that of the Merrimack numbered about 300. She was seaworthy in the shallow waters of the southern coasts and steered fairly well. The Monitor was launched at Greenpoint, Long Island, January 30th, and was turned over to the government on February 19th. The building of the two vessels was practically a race between the two combatants. On March 8th, about 1 p.m., the Merrimack, commanded by Commodore Franklin Buchanan, born 1800, died 1874, steamed down the Elizabeth, accompanied by 2 one-gun gunboats, to engage the wooden fleet of the Federals, consisting of the frigate Congress, 50 guns, and the sloop Cumberland, 30 guns. Both sailing vessels anchored off Newport News, and the steam frigates Minnesota and Roanoke, the sailing frigate St. Lawrence, and several gunboats anchored off Fortress Monroe. Actual firing began about 2 o'clock, when the Merrimack was nearly a mile from the Congress and the Cumberland. Passing the first of these vessels with terrific broadsides, the Merrimack rammed the Cumberland, and then turned her fire again on the Congress, which, in an attempt to escape, ran aground and was there under fire from 3 other Confederate gunboats, which had meanwhile joined the Merrimack. At about 3:30 p.m., the Cumberland, which had been keeping up a heavy fire at the Confederate vessels, sank, with her pennant still flying from the topmast above the waves. Between 4 and 4:30, the Congress, having been raked fore and aft for nearly an hour by the Merrimack, was forced to surrender. While directing a fire of hot shot to burn the Congress, Commodore Buchanan of the Merrimack was severely wounded and was succeeded in command by Lieutenant Catesby apt Roger Jones. The Federal steam frigates Roanoke, St. Lawrence, and Minnesota had all gone aground in their trip from Old Point Comfort toward the scene of battle, and only the Minnesota was near enough, about 1 mile, to take any part in the fight. She was in such shallow water that the Confederate ironclad ram could not get near her at ebb tide, and at about 5 o'clock the Confederates postponed her capture until the next day and anchored off Sewell's Point. The Monitor, under Lieutenant John Lorimer Worden, born 1818, died 1897, had left New York on the morning of March 6. After a dangerous passage in which she twice narrowly escaped sinking, she arrived at Hampton Roads during the night of the 8th, and early in the morning on the 9th anchored near the Minnesota. When the Merrimack advanced to attack the Minnesota, the Monitor went out to meet her, and the battle between the ironclads began at about 9 a.m. on the 9th. Neither vessel was able to seriously injure the other. The Monitor had the advantage of being able to outmaneuver her heavier and more unwieldy adversary, but the revolving turret made firing difficult, and communications were none too good with the pilot-house, the position of which on the forward deck lessened the range of the 2 turret guns. The machinery worked so badly that the revolution of the turret was stopped. After 2 hours fighting, the Monitor was drawn off, so that more ammunition could be placed in the turret. When the battle was renewed, at about 11:30, the Merrimack began firing at the Monitor's pilot-house, and a little after noon a shot struck the sight-hole of the pilot-house and blinded Lieutenant Worden. The Monitor withdrew in the confusion consequent upon the wounding of her commanding officer, and the Merrimack, after a short while for her adversary, steamed back to Norfolk. There were virtually no casualties on either side. After the evacuation of Norfolk by the Confederates on May 9th, Commodore Josiah Tatnall, then in command of the Merrimack, being unable to take her up the James, sank her. The Monitor was lost in a gale off Cape Hatteras on December 31st, 1862. Though the battle between the two vessels was indecisive, its effect was to neutralize the Merrimack, which had caused great alarm in Washington, and to prevent the breaking of the Federal blockade at Hampton Roads. In the history of naval warfare, it may be regarded as making the opening of a new era, the era of the armored warship.